So Kant claims that metaphysics is almost synonymous with philosophy, and he's kind of right to a certain extent. I mean, there are other sub-disciplines to it, but yeah, it kind of is philosophy's own. We lost physics a long time ago. Yeah, but he's kind of super embarrassed about that fact for the reason that it's not as certain as the sciences. It lacks a kind of the certainty and the progress that we've seen. The slow and steady progress that's gone on in science, for instance, has not been mirrored in metaphysics. Metaphysics, if you take a look at the traditions, it's the same positions just reappearing all over the place, and it's almost like just people utterly disagreeing with each other, and you can't prove one side of an argument or another in metaphysics. So Kant is utterly embarrassed about this. So yeah, now he'll go on to say that, in fact, it makes sense that that's that way because, of course, metaphysics is not a branch of knowledge. It's not a science, properly speaking, nor should it be used in science. But he says, hey, don't be frightened, those of you who love metaphysics. It will kind of continue on. It's going to be a perennial thing for human beings because of the very nature of reason itself. He kind of gives reason as a whole a function. The function of reason is to explain. It's to bring things together, everything, and to unify all experience under one explanation. And you saw how this was kind of the case last week with kind of phenomenal experience. So as we go through experience, we're just bombarded with kind of various phenomenon and appearances. And what the mind does is synthesizes those into various experiences, makes it a steady stream of consistently passing phenomena. Yeah, it's not just crazy chaos that we experience. Rather, it's kind of the systematic unfolding of experiences that goes forward. So that's what kind of reason does within phenomenon. But phenomenon itself, that passage of the moments of your life, for instance, as things are unfolding right now, reason wants a full explanation for all of it. So what started this passage of phenomenon, for instance? What ultimately explains it and what's it grounded on? Reason wants to know about that. It's part of its basic function. It's part of its drive, the rational drive, you might want to say. In order to get those explanations, because you don't get them within the experience itself, all we get is the passage of phenomenon, one moment after the other. We don't get an explanation in total for it in phenomenon itself. So what reason does is it operates outside of phenomenon. It operates outside of any possible experience to try and explain absolutely everything. To try and do that. And when it does that, it's operating outside of its ability to know. So when we took a look at science last week, according to Kant, right, we can know things with absolute certainty without actually examining experience. So doing geometry, for instance, you don't need to reference experience in order to map out the basic way that space works in geometry, right? Moreover, you kind of can understand the basic rules of causality without really any particular cause or effect taking place. And those will always hold within phenomenon or amongst phenomenon themselves, right? So the concepts that we work out in pure reason outside of experience itself, they hold for any possible experience, but they're also exhibited within experience. So we can verify that there is causality because we can see it taking place. We can verify that space is like this because it's exhibited within experience. And part of that is kind of how he brings empiricism and rationalism together. So we can figure, excuse me, the principles of experience out, the a priori principles of experience out. It's part of the rationalism without reference to experience, but they're always exhibited within experience itself. And that's the empiricist part, figuring out what actual causes are, kind of, right? So he brings those together. But explaining all of that, operating outside of any experience, says Kant claims, is outside of the bounds of our knowledge altogether. We can't know outside of that. But again, we have to speculate outside of that. A reason will continue to do so because that's the only place that complete and total explanations for everything kind of lie. That's where they are. Now, just a bit of terminology for when you're reading through it. So, and I didn't really discuss this last week. I probably should have. So there are kind of three levels towards reason for Kant. On the first level, reason consciousness, you might wish to say, right? Might be another name for it. On the first level, there's sensations. So it's sensory awareness, and that's going on right now if you're watching this. And of course, it's the a priori forms of space and time, the forms of sensibility themselves that Kant talks about that are at issue there, and they're again exhibited there. But that's kind of one level of knowledge for us. The other level is the understanding. So what the understanding does is take disparate phenomena as they appear to us and synthesize them via judgment. And it operates on the basis of what Kant calls the categories of the understanding. So causality would be an example of one of those. We might term it an idea, but it's a category. And the reason I mention that is because outside of experience, what basically happens, so this is reason working on reason's ideas itself outside of any possible experience of these things. So reasoning about origins of the universe, we could never experience an origin of the universe. Reasoning about God, for instance, we could never have an experience of God, but we can reason about that. Kant calls these ideas. Kant calls them ideas. Transcendental ideas, you might wish to say, right? Or transcendent ideas, you might wish to say. They're outside of any possible experience. And how calls them ideas, and what basically the nature of those are, how we kind of come up with them, is by analogy from experience. So, for instance, we posit that there must be an origin of the universe that explains the entire causal phenomenon, because each phenomena that we experience within like our own experience, our own personal experience, has a cause that comes prior to it. So, if we're looking for a total explanation of the entire universe, we're going to posit some sort of an idea, Kant will call it, an idea of an origin of the universe, or an idea of God to explain the entire universe, to bring everything under one complete, comprehensive explanation. But again, we have the forms of sensibility, that's space and time. We have the categories of the understanding, and those are the sorts of two realms of knowledge for Kant. We can know about those because they're exhibited in experience. Outside of that, when Kant's talking about ideas, he typically means that they're metaphysical concepts and that they are not objects of knowledge. We can't know them because they're not exhibited within experience itself. Hopefully that makes some sense, right? Now, how we come up with those ideas, again, is by way of analogy from experience. Analogy from experience. And the problem that he says, and we'll come to this afterwards, with these notions of saying whether or not there is an origin of the universe, is for each one of those ideas that are posited, there's almost like the mind, or a different side within metaphysical debates, will come up with a reason to think it's not the case. So there'll be disagreements there. Now, how do you kind of resolve disagreements that are outside of experience? Well, Kant's point is you can't. We can't know these things, right? So for all the people who believe that there is a God, they might have some reasons for it, but you would have a side that would say that God doesn't exist, who would have an equal amount of evidence. They balance each other out. So it's not within science where you could appeal to experience to demonstrate that your ideas about the categories of the understanding, for instance, are in fact true and valid. You can't do that. So these debates just kind of hang in the air, and then you're left with exactly what Kant is complaining about at the beginning of his discussion. It's just a bunch of people disagreeing with each other and not getting anywhere. And the reason for that, according to him, is this is not a branch of knowledge. It's not a branch of knowledge. Yeah. Anyways, so I'll head to the next section now because this video is getting kind of long, called The Dialectic of Reason. Pretty fun.